Welcome to the Joys of Binge Reading, the show for anyone who ever got to the end of a great book and wanted to read the next instalment. We interview successful series authors and recommend the best in mystery, suspense, historical and romance series, so you'll never be without a book you can't put down. You'll find this episode's show notes, a free ebook and lots more information at thejoysofbingereading.com. And now, here's our show.
Romantic suspense writer Brynn Kelly's high-octane Legionnaire series features broken brothers in arms who meet the right woman at the worst possible time. Sounds irresistible, doesn't it? And readers find it so. The series has reaped high praise. Hi there, I'm your host Jenny Wheeler, and today Brynn talks about her hot series, the importance of not quitting, and why she thinks she's got the ideal life. Before we talk to Brynn, just a reminder, the show notes for this binge reading episode can be found on the website, thejoysofbingereading.com. That's where you'll find a full transcript of our chat, plus links to Brynn's books and website, as well as details about how to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss future episodes. But now, here's Brynn.
Hello there, Brynn, and welcome to the show. It's great to have you with us.
Hi, Jenny. It's lovely to be joining you on this nice spring morning.
It is, and this time, most of my writers are way across the world, but this time we are actually almost neighbours, so that's lovely. You're a little bit further north than me in New Zealand, so we do share the same spring day. That's lovely.
Yes, that's right. I guess it wouldn't happen very often. Yeah,
No.
It's funny how often I deal with a lot of people in the US, and how often they wish me a happy fall or a happy winter, and it's like, well, actually, I'm sitting here in whatever sunshine right now.
That's right. Look, beginning at the beginning, was there a once upon a time moment when you decided that you wanted to write fiction? And if there was a catalyst for it, what was it?
For me, I don't think I could pinpoint a particular time. It was just something that I had always known. I was one of these kids who read voraciously and loved words, loved reading, loved anything at school to do with reading and writing. And I always knew that I was going to be a writer and a journalist. It's interesting, I have an 11-year-old son, and a couple of years ago I was reading a book to my boys. It was very action heavy. And my son put his hand on his chest and he said to me, "Mum, my heart's beating really quickly. This is so weird. It feels... This is stuff that's happening to this boy in this book, but it feels like it's happening to me." And it was just this beautiful moment because that's exactly what reading feels like to me. And I think it was exactly why when I was a child, reading was everything, because I had that empathy and that sensitivity that I could really relate. And I think that when he said that, something clicked in me. I was like, that's what the magic is. That's why I've always been on this journey. So I became a journalist, basically so I could get paid to write. Yay. But with always the idea that I would do fiction writing on the side. Unfortunately, my journalism career became all-encompassing and I wasn't writing enough. So I guess the catalyst for me came when I was in my early 30s, and I thought, what am I doing to actually achieve this goal I had always set for myself? I'd always sort of been playing around with bits and pieces of writing, but I'd never finished anything, and it was only ever tinkering. So I actually sat down. I took a job sub-editing a magazine, which was a little bit less intense and with more regular hours. So I was able to claw out some time to write a novel, and I wrote it, sent it off, thinking, this is it, I'm going to start my fabulous novel writing career, and it was rejected. Of course, as first novels always should be. And so from there, it was actually, it was a sort of a long stop-start process of figuring out how to switch from journalism to fiction writing. And which I finally did at the age of 40.
It is quite a big switch, isn't it?
It is. I mean, I think your story structures may be the same in some respects if you're doing creative nonfiction, switching to fiction, but that creative process must come from a whole different part of your brain. Going from a set of facts that have already been established, you're not telling your story, you're telling somebody else's story, to moving to a set of facts that have to come from somewhere in your brain. And I think I often struggle with that. And sometimes I forget that I'm allowed to make things up. When in Edge of Truth, my second book, is set, a lot of it is set in, actually it's all set in Ethiopia, which is a place I did some volunteer work in years ago. And there's this little village or town that I set a lot of it in. It's this ancient walled city. It's a very evocative place. And I spent so much time trying to figure out where all the gates were around this walled city and to get all of the logistics correct. And then I realised, from Google Maps and from blogs and from my own memories and my own photos, and I realised that, actually I could probably make some of this up. The overlap between my readers and people who know this little city very well would be very small.
That is so right. Yeah.
Do you find that? It's because you've had.
I do, and I love knowing that I have bits that are really true. I mean, it's important to me to know that even if something's unlikely, that it could happen. That I'm not really into fantasy in the sense that I like to feel, if I was challenged, I could argue convincingly that it could have happened, even if it was very unlikely.
Yes, and there's also, that sort of tenet that nonfiction can be as wild and crazy as you want it to be, but fiction has to be believable.
Yeah, that's right. And I think probably the other difference with journalism is that you have to get inside your people's heads and show what motivates them. And of course, in journalism, that would be very presumptuous too, unless you were doing a real in-depth piece and they knew that was what you were on about. You wouldn't assume that you could just decide what had motivated somebody to do something unless you actually asked them.
Exactly, yeah. But it's interesting going back to writing nonfiction after having written fiction. I do tend to ask those questions a bit more and try to get more into people's heads. Obviously, it's something you have to do very, very carefully because as you say, you can't make those presumptions. But it has been quite rewarding for my nonfiction and journalism to be able to do that, to use those fiction techniques.
Yeah, that's interesting. So why did you choose romantic suspense as your genre? Was that first book a romantic suspense one?
It was actually, but I mean, obviously I had been writing for a long time before that, as I say, just sort of, here and there playing with words for years. And I think actually I didn't choose romantic suspense, it chose me. I found when I was doing journalism, and I have also written quite a few nonfiction books that are in the creative nonfiction category mostly, that I really loved writing action-driven prose or action-driven pieces. And what I think drew me to romantic suspense was that you get that lovely mix of action and thriller, and that external story, as well as very, very deep emotions. And I think with a romantic suspense, you can go bigger on the stakes and the action, and then balance that out by really digging deep on the emotions. There are so many places you can go, and I think I really love those extremes, and that really attracted me and called to me. It also, it does produce challenges when you're writing because there's so much research to do and there's so much depth, so many depths to dig, but it's also very satisfying.
Yes. Your Legionnaire series, which is the one that we're kind of focusing on, is a high-octane series that follows a band of what you call broken brothers in arms who each meet the right woman at the worst possible time. And so what are some of the biggest challenges in writing a series like that?
Drawing on what I was just saying, I guess for me, it was that finding that balance between the suspense and the emotion. It's very easy in a story like that to let the external plot carry it away, and lose the internal plot, lose that conflict, lose the romantic drivers as well, and and it's quite hard because you can write a very action-packed, fast-paced piece, and then slow it down with a bit of romance, but you've got to make sure you keep it moving, no matter if you're slowing it down or speeding it up. And one difficult thing is that I can tell from my reviews that I do get a few straight thriller readers, or quite a few straight thriller readers, who get frustrated at the romance, slowing things down. And then you get the romance readers who say, I don't usually read romantic suspense and I enjoyed this, but it had too much action for me, or there wasn't enough romance. So it's such a tricky balance to try to satisfy both demands of the genre, to have this action-packed, fast-paced, exciting story, but also to have an authentic romantic relationship, especially because my books, it's not necessarily a conscious choice, but these books all take place within a few days, or each book takes place within a few days. And it's very hard to write an authentic love story when people have met sometimes 3 days ago. One of the stories, they had met a while ago. Yeah, so I think all of that balancing is the most challenging thing.
I guess, the old scientific fact that when people meet under high adrenaline circumstances, they tend to bond very quickly. That has to be your excuse for how quickly they manage.
Yes, I certainly draw on that, definitely. And I've also certainly, as the series has progressed, I've gone away from giving them a very a strong happily ever after to go to a happily for now. So you write it to a point there where the reader is confident that this is going to work.
Yeah, they can decide that they're at least in a situation where they will decide for themselves in the future what they want to happen, sort of thing. Yeah. Exactly.
It's funny when you talk about romance, isn't it? Because in any other genre, that would be a massive plot spoiler. But romance, it's about the how they get there, not what happens in the end.
Yeah. One of the doyens of New Zealand romance writing, Daphne de Jong, once said to me that romantic suspense is one of the hardest genres to pull off because of all those things that you're talking about. A lot of romance writers aren't so good at doing the action, but you really hit the ground running with your stories. You mentioned Edge of Truth. That is one where you kind of go in with a blast, and halfway through the book, you're still in this amazing sequence. It's remarkable. But I noticed that in number 3, Forbidden River, which I think is a novella, you bring your French Legionnaire back to New Zealand and give him a Maori love interest. How did you feel that you were expanding the conventions of the genre to do that? And how did your readers react to that one?
Sure. It never occurred to me that I was expanding anything. The thing is, all of my books are set in parts of the world that I have loved, that have really had an emotional connection with me when I've been there. So the first one is Southeast Asia, the second one Ethiopia, Forbidden River on the west coast of New Zealand, and A Risk Worth Taking is set in Europe and the UK. It seemed natural for me to come home, and that was an experimental story for me, because even after a lifetime of writing short journalism, I struggle to write short fiction. And so most of my books are 100,000 words or more. This one my goal was to write it at about 20 to 25, and just set myself a challenge of, could I write it in that time, in that word count, and it ended up being, I think, just short of 40,000. Anyway, but going back to what you were asking, I've had really, really good feedback. I think my American readers, which are my core readers, have really responded well to the setting. And what's lovely, what means so much to me, is that my Māori friends and my Māori beta readers have absolutely loved having such a strong wahine in a book, especially in, I guess, this kind of book, which is more of a global, has a global reach. It's not I didn't write it as a New Zealand book for a New Zealand market. I think that was very, very special to me to get that feedback. Yeah.
That is great. And did you always intend the Legionnaires to be a series?
No. Interestingly, it's interesting because the first book I wrote, which I mentioned, which got rejected, followed, and then I wrote a second, which was more of a contemporary romance, which also it failed at the last hurdle. I might resurrect these at some point, but I had intended those to be series. But I had after having failed to kind of quite get there with trad publishers with those stories, I took a step back and I thought, I'm going to stop writing what I think the editors want to publish and what I think readers want to read. I'm just going to go mad. I'm going to write big. I'm going to write epic. And so I started playing around with this, with Deception Island, which is the first book in the Legionnaire series. I also started playing around with a whole different concept, just to sort of throw some bigger ideas out there and see if that would get more of a take up. Just take away those boxes and go big. So I only ever saw to the end of that first book. And interestingly, that's when the editors and agents started to sit up and take notice. So that was a real lesson for me, moving away from what I thought was going to sell to actually what I could really sink my teeth into and enjoy writing.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And you've had some terrific endorsements from high-profile names, on the back of your books. You've got Gina Showalter, Sharon Sala, Heather Graham, Karen Robards, wonderful writers who are endorsing your work. Did that give you a little bit of a sort of endorphin rush?
Yeah, there might even have been a few tears occasionally. When I wasn't. I'm very fortunate that having, living down here, I don't have those kinds of contacts as, say, my writer friends who work in the US, and these people might be in their writing groups. So I was very fortunate that my publishers and my agent were able to make those connections. But that's one thing I'm constantly blown away in the romance writing community, is how supportive it is and how there's none of this professional jealousy, or not that I have encountered. Everyone is so encouraging. And I think, these big name authors who are so generous in giving endorsements, someone gave them an endorsement once, they're paying it forward. And so people that they endorse pay it forward. And it's just this really, really lovely, encouraging industry where I think people realize that you're not, by lifting up another author, you're not damaging your chances. You're hopefully growing the whole industry and pulling in more readers across your genre or subgenre.
Yeah.
Which benefits everyone.
Yeah, that's right. Now, perhaps turning from specific books to a wider look at your career, you've mentioned that you've been in journalism. I know you've won awards with your journalistic writing, but what is the one thing you've done more than any other that you feel may have been the secret to your success?
Not giving up, sticking with it. And I'm sure that's same of many published writers, is there's a famous quote saying that something like, you might know it, the only guarantee that you will fail as a writer is if you quit.
Yeah.
Or something.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that very well. I can't remember who's,
it's only failure if you stop trying or something. Well, yeah, I know.
Yeah.
The way you mean.
Yeah. There's only one thing that will guarantee you will fail, and that's if you quit. And of course, and there were many times that I wanted to quit. When I got that first rejection, I was absolutely devastated, because of course this was not my plan. My plan was that this was going to launch me in a whole new career, and it was going to be beautiful. Although in fact it's probably quite good that it didn't happen, because I'm not a fast writer, and that those early books were category series romance, and you have to write those very, very quickly, I think, to keep the momentum going.
That's right.
That's an aside. But I did. There were times where I put it aside for a few years, but it would nag at me. It was unfinished business, and I would always go back to it. And there are always times, and I've had a bit of a year this year where I've had to kind of dig in and try a few different things. And I think, I always think of that saying that I can't remember off the top of my head. I should put it in my study, really. If you give up, then you're definitely not going to succeed.
Yeah, that's right. Look, there's an intriguing mention in your author profile of your interest in classical singing and theatre. I wondered if you could just tell us a little bit about that. Where did it come from, and is it likely to surface in a future series?
It's just something I've always loved doing. I actually just we closed a production of The Crucible on Saturday, which was just fabulous, just being immersed in Arthur Miller for a few months. But I think it all comes back to that love of storytelling and that love of emotion. Mm-hmm. It's something that theatre and singing is something that I did a lot of as a child and in my teens and early 20s. And then I had a confidence crisis when I was in my early 20s and was convinced I sucked and gave it all up. And then I got to the age of 40, just the same time I was getting some traction with my writing, with my fiction writing. And I thought, that's unfinished business. And I went back into it. So I've only been back into it for a few years, but I'm absolutely loving it. And I think it's hard to pinpoint exactly what it brings me. I think it unlocks something in the creative brain, and it all dovetails very, very neatly into my writing, because of course acting is all about motivation and writing is all about motivation, and it's all about language, of course, and communication. And it helps me when you're on stage. Sometimes you don't know what to do with your hands, especially if you're reacting to something. So I'm often thinking, what would my character do? Would my character fiddle with her scarf? Would my character rub her hands down her legs? And then I can sort of take those into my writing and hopefully might make my writing more authentic. So they fit together so nicely. And the singing is another interesting one, because of course singing is all about storytelling, it's all about emotion. But what I find is that you get the sense of rhythm and flow from music that you can bring into writing. And sometimes if I'm looking at a sentence and it feels clunky to me, I can sort of think, read it aloud and figure out what's wrong with that rhythm, what's wrong with that flow, and smooth it out. And I think that's music helping there. But basically I just live in this dream world where I write fiction by day and act it out by night. And I don't have to live in the real world at all.
You've set it up beautifully. Look, it's sometimes said that writers tend to write the same story in different guises. And I know we've joked about your tagline of meeting the right woman in the worst possible circumstances. But digging a little deeper, do you agree with that idea? And if so, what is that story for you? Is it a redemption story or?
Yep, you've nailed it. Redemption. Funny.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it is. But yeah, I'm really fascinated by that idea. But I've read it up a bit. The core story. But it's something I think you can only figure out in hindsight. I don't think I would have been able to come up with that after 2 books. It's only after 4 that I can look back and you can see the common themes and what you go back to. But I don't know whether that's going to come into my next books or that will change. So I think it was Courtney Milan who's one of my favorite authors, is quite big on core story, and I'm sure I read something where she said you can only figure this out after 6 books or 10 books, or quite a lot of books. You can figure out that thread. So I'm not, definitely through the Legionnaire series, it's redemption. I'm not sure if that will always be my core story, but it will be a very interesting evolution. And of course, with evolution, it's something that you don't know you're evolving at the time. It's only when you look back.
Look, turning to Brynn as reader, I called this series The Joys of Binge Reading because it was partly sparked by the idea of the risen popularity of series and the fact that people, when they find an author they like to read a lot of them fairly quickly these days. It's probably the Netflix influence. But you obviously have been a binge reader in the past. Who do you like to binge read now, and who have you binge read in the past?
That's interesting because I was thinking about that, and I was thinking that actually I don't binge read writers so much anymore. I think it's because there are so many romance writers out there. I try to read as widely as possible. I try to read as many as possible, especially within my own subgenre. But I don't tend to read all of the books by that person. There's always something new and interesting. So I'm looking at the shiny baubles. But the one romantic suspense author I would read, or she's not writing romantic suspense anymore, but anyway, one author that I would read everything of is Jill Sorensen, who used to write romantic suspense and then went into writing really sexy motorbike contemporaries. And she's just got a wonderful writing style. I don't think she's been writing much lately, but mostly when I binge read outside of my subgenre because I can switch off, and I like binge reading historical. Courtney Milan, who I mentioned earlier, is probably my biggest go-to. She's just such a talented writer, and her characters are so real, and her prose is beautiful, and her historical settings seem very vivid as well. Outside of romance, Kate Atkinson is my go-to author. Although I haven't loved everything she's written, but I have admired how she is not afraid to try new things. Mm-hmm. She's written and I loved her literary detective stories, I think they were branded as, which were quite funny and quirky. But I loved her early books. Behind the Scenes at the Museum was like a game breaker for me. Yes. I didn't so much like Life After Life. But yeah, she's certainly an author that I would go to again and again. But I don't think that's technically binge reading because she's not prolific enough for that. So yeah, that's interesting. I don't binge read as much these days as I might have in the past.
I've noticed a funny thing that I really enjoy my reading still, but I understand what you're saying. I feel as if I very rarely get a chance just to read for my pleasure.
Yes, absolutely.
I've got another motivation as well. Even if I'm really enjoying what I'm doing, it's not quite the same feeling as sinking into a hot bath. You're kind of on alert for things. I think it's that, the left brain and the right brain thing. Which one controls you? You both of them are still working when you're a writer because you're always stopping and going, oh, I like how she did that. Yeah. Or, oh, I would have preferred a bit more motivation in this scene, or, it's really hard to switch off, which is why I think I like reading historical, because I know that I would never write it because
I am such a slow researcher. I would be researching every word.
Look, we're sort of running out of time here. So circling around to looking back over where you've come from, at this stage in your career, if you were setting up all over again as a writer, is there anything that you would change about how you've gone about it?
No, I don't think like that. I think life is not a linear thing where you can, change one thing and keep on going down that same line. I think we all might have made mistakes in the past, or things might have gone in different directions, but there are so many wonderful things about now that might not have happened if we went back and fixed that problem. So I really don't think like that, and I can't think like that. I know there are things that I wish had gone a different way, or sometimes I think, I should have started writing more fiction earlier, but that wasn't to be. And if I had started, say, writing more fiction when I was in my 20s, I might not have had the experiences that have made me the writer I am now.
Yeah.
I might be a different writer. It might not be any better or worse. But I don't tend to look back with regrets, because I think we just don't know what the sliding doors would have given us through life, and it's more about making the most of now, I guess.
Yeah. So what is next for Brynn, the writer? What is happening now? Projects under development? Yes,
it's a very much a watch this space kind of situation at the moment. Actually, to answer your question earlier, is the theatre work going to have going to pop up in my writing? That's one of the watch this spaces. I'm just waiting to hear back on something that I've got my fingers very tightly crossed for. But I'm actually going through a process of reinvention. The Legionnaire story series is finished, and I'm taking this opportunity to sort of test out some new things and to try and figure out whether I still want to keep writing along those lines, or tweak it slightly, or even just go into a whole genre. I feel like I've kind of done my master's in creative writing now, and it's time to figure out what I want to do with my life. So as I say, very much a watch this space thing, and I've got nothing that I can promise is coming out in the next few months, but I'm working on many things.
So just give us a few hints on the theatre thing. Is it like you've pitched a new series, or is it something quite different?
Yeah, and it's actually in front of some editors at the moment, which would be huge, but we shall see.
Oh, great.
But then it might come to nothing,
Yeah, as these things occasionally don't. But
exactly, yeah, that's right. You've got to be prepared for it, anything. But I'm also interested in exploring indie publishing as well, either doing both trade and indie, or going full indie. But we'll see. So many possibilities.
Great. Look, we are now coming to an end, but that's a fascinating end. And for people who want to keep in touch with you and follow what happens with that, where can they find you online?
Facebook. I have an author page. If you search Brynn Kelly author, you can follow me there. I've also have a website, Brynn Kelly. That's Brynn with 2 N's, BrynnKelly.com, and I'm on Twitter as Brynn Writes. So BrynnWrites.
And are you fairly active on social media?
Twitter's my go-to. Though it's it sucks a lot of time. It's like writing is like 30% writing and 70% Twitter. So I'm mostly active on Twitter but I always put any news on Facebook as well.
Fantastic. Well, look, Brynn, thanks so much. It's been great to talk to you. I'm sure that your readers found it fascinating. Very thoughtful answers. I'm very grateful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jenny. Lovely to talk to you.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Joys of Binge Reading podcast. You can find all the details and links for this episode at www.thejoysofbingereading.com. We'd love to hear your comments and suggestions for who you'd like us to interview next. And if you enjoyed the show, take a moment to subscribe on iTunes or a similar provider so you won't miss out on future guests. Thanks for joining us, and happy reading.
The Joys of Binge Reading podcast is put together with fantastic technical help from Dan Cotton and Abe Raffles. Dan is an experienced sound and video engineer who's ready and available to help you with your next project. Seek him out at dcaudioservices@gmail.com. That's D for Daniel, C for Charlie, audioservices@gmail.com, or check our show notes. He's fast, he takes pride in getting it right, and he's great to work with. Our voiceovers are done by Abe Raffles, another gem of sound and screen. Abe has 20 years of experience on both sides of the camera/microphone, as a cameraman director and also as a voice artist and TV presenter. I think you'd agree that his voice is both light-hearted and warm. He is super easy to work with no matter what the job. You'll find him at Abe, A-B-E, at pointandshoot.co.nz. As I say, the full details in the show notes on the website. That's it for now. Thanks for listening. Hopefully see you next week. Bye.